Let's talk about an interesting subject to do with picture quality. It's one that we continually mention on the podcast. I bang on about it in all of the reviews that I write, but is it still relevant? We're talking about video calibration. Now, what is video calibration? In very, very briefly, in layman's terms, it's making sure that your device, your display device, matches the same standards on which that content was created. And these standards exist. They say what colours should look like, what white should look like, what the colour of white is when it comes to video. And it's important that you remember that fact. It's video that we're talking about, not what does white look like when it's got loads of blue in it and like your Daz automatic washing powder from the past and all the rest of it. We're talking about video white, and the standards say what video white should look like. And when it comes to calibration, what you're looking for is basically that your TV can display white correctly, and thereafter it can also display colour correctly to the different standards for colour. And there are different standards for colour. There's standards for standard dynamic range. High dynamic range is completely different from that. So what are these standards? Is it relevant? Well, it just so happens we've got the UK's busiest professional calibrator on the podcast. Not only consumer displays, Jules, but you also go into studios and calibrate the actual displays that the content is created on. And I have to assume that you are calibrating them to those exact standards that I've just talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually really great to be able to go in at the content creation stage and also then to be in people's homes at the delivery stage, because you see both sides of the equation. And of course, you can bring that expertise, that knowledge of how it's done in the studio into the home. And I think a lot of forum members and people in general, I see this on Facebook forums, etc., just don't have an idea of how the process works. So they might, fiddle around trying to dial things in by eye, and they'll call that calibration. And people use that word really fluidly in a way that makes me wince at times. It's not borrowing settings from somebody else's telly or from a review. That's not calibration. Calibration is the process of measuring and adjusting the output of a display to those references that you mentioned. And that can only be done by, I've got some props here, I hope you don't mind, Phil.
Oh, absolutely.
That can be done by, it has to be done by a pattern generator. There's a little diddly one. This is a Meridio 6G. It's 4K HDR, Dolby Vision, etc. And that is what is outputting the reference patterns to the display. So you send the pattern to the display, you want the pattern to be on the TV, and then you'll measure this back with one of these and one of these as well. So this is a colorimeter, it's a Klein K10A, and that's a spectroradiometer, that's the Jetty 1511. So expensive pieces of kit, and they'll send the information back from the display to the software, and then you can make your adjustments. So you're tuning in the picture to those references to get it accurate.
Now, this is where, like you say, people get confused, and we now have modes on the TVs that are very accurate out of the box these days. Things like Filmmaker Mode, and the whole point of Filmmaker Mode mainly was to get people out of the super smooth frame interpolation modes and so on, and have film look the way it should look at 24 frames per second, and how the TV manages to do that, but also to get colour and white correct on the screen, or as accurate as possible to the standards for an out-of-the-box preset. Now, obviously, you're going to have drift when it comes to component. It's usually about 10% when it comes to different components within a display. But out of the box, you can get relatively accurate these days, results these days with digital displays and so on. But that's not calibration either. And I think the thing that people miss is that, yes, that's accurate, put it into Filmmaker Mode. If you're not going to get your TV calibrated, that's as accurate as you're going to get for your room. Calibration takes it a step further. So explain the step further that you take when you go in, because it's not just about the picture on the TV that you're actually adjusting, making sure that works correctly.
Well, of course, I mean, the calibration has to involve the whole video chain. If you've got some source device that's not set correctly, then you're not going to get a calibrated image, even if your display has been calibrated. So calibration isn't just sort of, has to involve the complete system. And so one of the things that a professional calibrator will do is not just treat the display, or treat the whole system and make sure everything is optimized so you get the best and most accurate picture out of your system there. So there's a lot more involved than just treating the TV. But it is great that we have these more accurate modes now. Filmmaker is a great catch-all, isn't it? We have had ISF modes, THX modes. We've had attempts, movie mode on Samsungs. We've had attempts by manufacturers to give us a more accurate mode for a number of years now. But Joe Public doesn't know the difference between, what the heck is ISF? What is Technicolor? What is THX? So Filmmaker gives Joe Public the opportunity to have a more sort of more of a handle on the mode to go to. It's more descriptive of what it is. Yeah, so Filmmaker Mode is a really accurate mode, at least comparatively speaking to what we've had in many past years. Thankfully, things have got a lot better over the years, thanks to AV forums.
And Tom Cruise.
Things have improved. But there is still further you can go with your display, because there's only so much you can achieve by putting a standard set of settings into a particular model and having that rolled out throughout the whole of those displays that are produced. So calibration will take it that step further.
But Jules, forum members put their TV into Filmmaker Mode, and people on YouTube put their TV into Filmmaker Mode, and it's dull. It's insipid. The colours are not right, and this is the argument that we're getting at the moment. And the reason we're getting this argument is obviously manufacturers in the game of selling TVs. They have marketing departments who want the latest, picture processing modes and fancy names. I mean, we're not just pointing fingers at Philips, but we had the Philips news story before, and we had all these different terminology for different settings within the TV picture processing. Marketing departments need that to sell product. These TVs need to look good on a showroom floor, so your eye is drawn to them when you walk in to buy a TV. People then have that assumption that Filmmaker Mode or ISF mode or calibrated mode is wrong because it's dull, it's not as bright, it's not as in your face. So quickly explain why people see that difference and why they should stick it out with a Filmmaker Mode, and which initially looks dim.
Yeah, of course. Manufacturers are in the interest of selling a display. If making a display purple sold the panel, sold a TV, they'd make them purple, regardless of references and accuracy and how the film is. So they need to make money, and that's what they do. When you walk into a showroom, what are you going to walk up to? There's 20 displays in the showroom. Which one are you going to buy? Your eye will probably be caught by the brightest and most colorful one. So that's what they do. And there's a bit of an arms race, isn't there, between manufacturers to make theirs the brightest and most colorful in the shop. So that's what they'll come out of the box with. And I've had no end of clients who've just assumed that the picture mode that the TV boots into once it was switched on is the correct one. That's what they want you to watch. There needs to be some education.
That's a really interesting point. I mean, has that changed? I mean, I can't honestly remember what my B7 stuck itself in standard out of the box. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't the most offensive of the.
No, these days it's standard. Every TV that I test that comes in out of the box, it's usually standard mode that they're in. They're never in the vivid or dynamic modes. And in the setup menus now, you have a choice between home and store setup. So is it going to be in a store? Is it going to be in the home? So there have been some improvements there. But even standard mode is not the correct mode if you want to see the content as it's intended to be seen. Whites are very, very blue. But your typical Joe Blogs on the street doesn't realize that. They don't realize that that's a trick to use to make things look a certain way, and people think white should be white. Well, they have their idea of what white is. Video white is a warm white, and a lot of people when they see that for the first time, because they're flicking through the different modes, they think, oh, that's horrible, it's very yellow. It's supposed to be that colour.
Well, and of course, it's based around the temperature of the sun. And if you asked any kid to draw a sun, they won't draw a blue disc, will they? It'll be at least slightly yellow.
If they did, you need to ask some serious questions about where they may hail from, but like that. Yes. I am looking forward to a whole new world of calibration to cope with mankind cracking into interstellar travel and having to work out a completely new base of white, depending on celestial arrangements of
Alpha Centauri blue.
It's supposed to be a piece of paper and the midday sun is video white. That was always the way Joel Silver explained it. And Joel was the guy behind ISF. So it's supposed to look that way. We're going to come back to this over the weeks and months to come, because I think there needs to be the education out there. Now, it's up to you what you put your TV into. If you prefer standard mode or sports mode or games mode or whatever, if that's what you prefer, we're not saying you're wrong. That is your decision to make, and it will always be the end user's decision to do that. It's the same with music. People have a preference as to how they want to listen to the music. There's less standards in that sphere, but at the same time, there's given ways of doing things in both camps. Just with video, it's very, very much standards based. And if you want to see it the way it's intended to be seen, the way, like Joel says, he goes into the studios. These people spend hours and hours and hours working on what a colour should be within a certain scene, because it has to convey an emotion, and colour is used to convey emotion. Whether you're aware of that or not, when you're watching a piece of content, that is the intention there. And we're going to try and get some colour graders on the podcast in the coming weeks and months to explain what their art is, what it is that they actually do with the direction of the director and so on. What is it that they're trying to get across in a certain scene? Why is it they're using colour in a certain way? And the famous one we always go back to is the Matrix. When they're in the Matrix, there's a green hue. When they're in the real world, it's a lot bluer and colder look. If your TV's set up wrong, you're not getting that. You're not getting that. And it's supposed to be subconscious. Your brain's supposed to pick up on these things. And when it comes to horror movies, it's always the colour red. If you watch a typical horror film, you'll notice that usually none of the characters are dressed in red. There's very little red within scenes. It's usually a more desaturated look, because when red is seen, it's usually to denote danger or somebody's been injured or whatever.
Decapitated.
Usually depends what kind of horror you're into, but that's usually and it just as the use sound, the use of colour and so on. And if you want to see that in the content that you're watching, then you have to adhere to the standards. So we're going to come back to this in the weeks and months ahead, because I think it's good for education. It's good to let people know why things are done. If you then decide that standard mode's for you and you're going to have smoothing on and all the rest of it, then fair enough. That's your choice at the end of the day. But there are standards, there are ways to set your equipment up to get the absolute best out of it. And if you're spending a lot of money on a big screen TV or a projector or some other display device, you want to be getting the best out of that. And obviously Jules does this day to day out, like I say, in studios and with consumers. Obviously, I do it when we get TVs through. We use calibration, we use the standards to measure and benchmark and objectively test product. And there's reasons why we do that. And I think we need to explain that a little bit more and get back to the subject. It's something we've gone over for years, and you may know the story inside out and why we do it. But at the same time, there's a lot of new social media stars popping up. There's more people on YouTube now. There's more misinformation or people coming in with the wrong angle sometimes and pointing a finger and saying, well, those standards are 30 years old. You're making your TV look like something in the 1990s. Well, that's not the whole story, and that's not fair. And we want to give the other side of the story. So we're going to do that in the weeks and months ahead. We've got Jules here with his expertise. And like I say, we're going to try and get more people from the industry, film industry, broadcast industry on the podcast to explain to you exactly what it is that they do, what the art form is, and why standards exist and why it's important that you set your TV up in a certain way. So thanks very much, Jules.